to this captivating episode of our podcast, CIO Talk with Riaz, where I had the privilege of interviewing the brilliant cybersecurity professional Hunter Ely. Hunter's profound passion for all things cybersecurity shines through as he effortlessly conveys complex concepts and shares innovative ideas. Personally, I gained tremendous value from our conversation, and I'm confident that you will too. I am Riaz Yusuf, your host, and I'm a Chief Information Officer at a college. I bring you insightful content that keeps you up to date with latest developments in IT. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so you never miss out on the exciting content that I have in store. I would like to clarify here that the content I share on my channel is completely independent and not associated with my employment or employer in any way. Now, let's dive into this exciting discussion with exceptional Hunter Ely. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited today to interview Hunter Ely, who's joining us for a conversation today. I'm super excited to talk about security and stuff. What is Hunter's passion? And we know that's where a lot of organizations are interested as well. So, Hunter, thank you for joining us. Why don't you introduce yourself for the benefit of my audience?
Awesome. Well, thank you, Riaz, for inviting me to be interviewed today. I appreciate that. So my role here, I'm at Palo Alto Networks, and I serve as our higher ed field strategist or field CISO, they call me. And really, I do a couple of things in this role. One, I work with our internal sales teams to message around how we talk about higher ed, how we talk to our friends in higher ed, and how we support the community that higher ed has built. The other piece of that is I get to go out and talk to customers all the time about where they are on their security journey and where they're trying to go, the problems they're trying to solve. And I do that for two reasons. One, of course, to help our customers be better at security, do things more effective and efficiently. But second is to bring that back so that our teams can understand what are those problems, what are those struggles that our customers are having out in the real world, particularly in the higher ed space. Because as you know, higher ed is a dynamic and interesting place to work, but you have many masters to serve, if you will, or many constituencies to serve. And that can include the student population, the faculty population. I talk to research universities all the time. So understanding how the community takes in our products and how they're dealing with security problems day to day, and then how we in turn continue to improve and support them. I came out of 20 years in higher ed, so I was very excited to take this position because I still get to be a part of the community, and I still get to work with these folks who are so mission driven as I am. So happy to be here and happy to talk about all things security, particularly when it comes to our higher ed customers.
Wonderful. That's great, Hunter. So, what were you doing in higher ed before taking on this current role you have?
Sure. So I spent, I'm a graduate of Louisiana State University, so of course, go Tigers, and I got my master's at Tulane University. So roll wave as well. I spent 20 years doing that. I was as a student worker, I was working in our labs, supporting the needs of our public computer labs, because back in the late 90s, that's where a lot of our students had to do their computer work. If they had to do something in Photoshop, they weren't doing it on a laptop because they didn't have one. They were
Yep.
doing it in the computer lab. So I spent my first couple of years doing that. I moved into networking. I spent several years doing digital forensics, which was just a great learning experience. Dealing with not just preserving data and things like that, but actually doing cybercrime, white collar crimes, child pornography, those kinds of cyber criminal cases. And then I moved into security in around 2007, 2008. I got my CISSP and really began the security journey in earnest. And I spent the last 7 years as the Chief Information Security Officer at Tulane University down in New Orleans. So when it was time to move on from there, I really wanted to find a role where I could continue to support higher ed, but do it in a more broad and bigger way. So luckily, the timing worked out that I ended up at Palo Alto Networks in this role.
That's great. You have seen the both sides of the higher ed. That's wonderful.
Absolutely.
That's excellent. So in the cybersecurity world, we all hear about the word zero trust. Can you tell us about that? What does zero trust mean?
Yeah, before I define that, let me say a couple things. One, I would say is that I heard from a CISO a few weeks ago. He said, "I hate this term. It's marketecture." It's like I don't know what it means to you, but I know what it means to me, and it just means it's an excuse for a vendor to come into my office and tell me how they're going to sell me some zero trust product. So that's something we're working against, and it's something I'm very passionate about because I think that the term itself is overused and misunderstood. But let's back up just a little bit. A few years ago, when you thought about cybersecurity, there were all these pockets. You had your antivirus, you had your firewall, you had your other endpoint products, you had NAC, all these different things that were trying to solve the problem of individual cybersecurity issues. And the way that was done was through a best in class or best of breed model. Security in layers. So you'd have the endpoint would have one policy. You'd have one policy for authentication, another policy for the firewall, and then you had to do something with those things. Had to log that or put it into some sort of SIM and sort of divine what's going on in the network. And you had to do it through all these different products. So zero trust really came about as a way to solve that problem, right? How do you look at security as a holistic problem and solve for it in a holistic way? So the thing that I like about zero trust is that zero trust was born out of this idea that everything on the network is implicitly trusted past that first gate. So you authenticate into the network, well, you're in. You have implicit trust to go wherever you want. And so the adversaries have been using that for a long, long time to their advantage. So if they got credentials or if they got a way into a system, then they had the keys to the kingdom. So zero trust was a way of removing that implicit trust, defining those things that you want to really protect, and then building out a model that was both repeatable and scalable to meet that need. So all of that to say that zero trust is this idea of removing as much of the attack surface as possible, defining a smaller protect surface around that service or that server or whatever it is you're protecting, so that you can squeeze down the perimeter as small as possible, and then build out policies that are dynamic and changing in response to if this person is logged in from two different locations in a short amount of time, or if this person is coming in from different devices that don't meet minimum health requirements. The idea of zero trust is gating that at every interaction. So ultimately, zero trust is about protecting the transaction, not just the session. So that's when we talk about this with our customers, we really have to just break it down to that and say zero trust is a philosophy, right? It's not a product. Of course, if anybody's trying to sell you zero trust as a product, you can rest easy knowing that they're not understanding what the purpose of zero trust is. But zero trust is really taking a session, if you will, and then gating every interaction to make sure that is this person or this asset trusted to communicate with this other asset at every single stage, and then questioning it along the way. That's really what we're trying to do. And the reason I like talking about zero trust in these contexts is because in higher ed particularly, you have all of these use cases that you're trying to secure, for, but you can distill each one down and think about zero trust as an individual activity for that service, but how it fits into the larger picture of how you do zero trust in your networks. And that way, I've talked about this in talks in the past. I call it, eating the elephant, right? You have to decide what's the important things you want to secure, and it's to break those down into those pieces and secure those use cases individually with a consistent architecture and methodology across your network. And that includes endpoint, cloud, and et cetera. And to me, this is the way you can build that path forward, and have a holistic security model that actually works and is responsive to the needs of your users.
Excellent. Thank you, Hunter. This is the best explanation I've heard around zero trust. This makes total sense. So would you say zero trust is something that every organization should adopt?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that both this administration and the previous administration have made various proclamations around zero trust. The Biden administration has sent out 2 presidential memos around the fact that zero trust is the methodology by which the U.S. government is going to start securing their assets, and they're requiring everybody from the executive office of the president on down to start to meet these zero trust principles. And so the way this ball is going to roll downhill, particularly for my customers, is that when you talk about Research 1, Research 2 universities, zero trust is going to be the cornerstone by which researchers are allowed to take in and process grant-funded data. So you think about NSPM 33, that's another research-related regulation that talks about security, and the zero trust regulations that have come down from the White House. These are going to be the ways in which universities and researchers are required to plan out how they're going to research or how they're going to secure research projects going forward. So it's not a very large stretch to think that if the research part of the research university community is being required to do zero trust, that is going to be necessary across the infrastructure to continue to support them and the other regulations that will continue to come down the pike on that. So zero trust is one of these things. It's here to stay. We need to understand how it affects us, and we need to be clever about how we integrate a zero trust philosophy into our infrastructures. But it's not going anywhere, and it's something that's going to continue to be more front and center from a regulatory and compliance standpoint. So we might as well spend our time understanding it now and starting to build those architectures so that we're ready for that eventuality, which is, like I said, quickly approaching.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So in order to establish a zero trust architecture, should an organization use a same one product across the board, or can it be accomplished leveraging multiple products?
So this is a two-part question, right? On one hand, I talked about the best of breed idea in security a few years ago. And I still believe that best of breed is important, but I think that instead of focusing on individual capabilities, you have to think about what are all of those capabilities I need across the board. So on one hand, IT transformation, and I know this is another one of those loaded terms. I don't like talking about transformation in this way because it brings a lot of baggage with it. Mm-hmm. But all organizations are going through some sort of IT transformation right now. They're Absolutely. All modernizing security. So mm-hmm. The one question you have to ask yourself is buying more products improving security outcomes? And I think the answer is often no, because while you can improve the situation on individual problems, problem areas with those capabilities, you still have to process that in. You still have to use analysts to collate those things and bring them all together. So on one hand, no, transformation is making making everyone rethink how they do security across the board. So there's going to be, and there is, I'm seeing it across the board, a somewhat collapse in the number of vendors that are in space. Now, that doesn't mean that capabilities are being reduced. It just means that folks are trying to find ways to have more tightly integrated security. So that's one thing. The answer to your question is no. I mean, zero trust is a philosophy. So when you think about John Kindervag, who created the term zero trust, and a good friend of mine, George Finney, who's the CISO of SMU, who's written a couple of books on zero trust, what they tell you is that zero trust is a 5-step process. You have to define your protect surface. You have to map your transactions. You have to build an architecture that supports that. You have to create policies that tighten down that control. And then you monitor and maintain so that you can start the cycle anew. The idea here is that you'll never reach perfection, but zero trust allows you to hone in on those things that you want to protect and build those policies as they go. So in steps 2 and 3, where you talk about the transaction flows and you talk about the zero trust architecture, what you have to ask yourself at that moment when you're working on those activities is, when you think about the who, what, where, and why of those transactions, those assets, and how they're interacting, do you need more security products to do that? And if you do, how do they integrate in a way that support a zero trust architecture, that support those policies, and ultimately allow you to monitor and maintain that infrastructure? So it depends, right? All these answers depends. But it really depends on what are the assets you're protecting, what do those transactions look like, and do you need multiple security products to reach your zero trust goals? So as long as you think about in the context of the 5-step process of zero trust, then the hope is that you're using a minimally viable set of products and services to meet your needs, so that you're both simplifying how you do security, but you're also improving outcomes.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's very helpful, Hunter. Thank you very much. What's the name of the author that wrote books about zero trust?
So John Kindervag, who worked at Palo Alto Networks for several years and was at Forrester before us, is the father of zero trust. So he's written several books on this, and he lives here I live in Austin. He lives in Dallas, so we cross paths from time to time. In fact, I'm going to see one of his buddies tomorrow, a guy named George Finney, who I also mentioned, who wrote a book called Project Zero Trust. And Project Zero Trust is a fictionalized account of a company who is going through some IT transformation, and they have a situation which creates a need to do a zero trust project, and it walks through how they do that project. I really like that book because it's kind of a quick read, and it shows you how a team comes together and can build zero trust out, from the ground floor. So John Kindervag is the father, and like I said, George Finney wrote a great manual on how to do this, and we've been talking to a lot of customers who've read that book and have really come away with a good understanding of zero trust. So I can't recommend either of them enough, because they both really helped me to understand what the purpose of zero trust is, not just the architecture, if you will.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll find these books, a link to these books, and include in the show notes.
Awesome.
That might help some of the audience. Great. Wonderful. So is zero trust terminology just used by Palo Alto, or is it becoming more of an industry-wide terminology now?
Yeah, so when John Kindervag was at Forrester, he coined the term, and wrote some papers on that, this idea of reducing the attack surface, removing implicit trust, that sort of stuff. And really the first effort you saw out of that was Google's BeyondCorp model. And really they were focused on how do you support remote users who need to do very important things, remote developers, remote customer-facing people, remote inside reps, things like that. How do you support all of those use cases so that those folks can be out and do their jobs in a remote way, but still be very secure? So the Google BeyondCorp model, which is probably close to 10 years ago now, was really the first try at that. And then Microsoft has made zero trust sort of core to their business, as has many of our competitors and colleagues out there in the security space. When you think about anybody that's doing software-defined networking these days, all of that is built on zero trust. So it's a term that we didn't create, but it's a term that we have to embrace because the entire market is embracing it. And like I said, when we talk about it, the first thing we talk about is how loaded the terminology is, but how at the center of it, there is a reason that the federal government's going this direction. There's a reason that these major IT corporations are going this way, and there's a reason that, when you think about the Targets and Home Depots of the world are also
Mhm.
going in this direction, because it's really the only way forward. So it's here to stay in that way, and certainly we're all talking about it because it seems to be the way forward. From a security standpoint, we're all moving down the field in the same way. So I'm excited from that
Absolutely.
perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Um, so the artificial intelligence market is growing, right? A lot of companies are now into artificial intelligence a great deal, especially in the higher education. That puts, I mean, it's a win in the regard of improving productivity and so on and so forth. But at the same time, it also opens up the possibility of cheating, perhaps, by students using some artificial intelligence tool to write papers for them and such.
Mhm.
But my question is not related to that, the user management aspect, but from the security aspect. What do you see as need for uh, evolving security operations in order to adapt to the growth in artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so there's a couple things to dig into here. One, um, you know, particularly when it comes to the customers that I support, as I'm certain well know, you're serving a big constituency, but you have a small staff that's doing that, and they have to be highly effective. So the first thing that has to happen is that you have to integrate your security. So if your firewall alerts on an interesting activity that doesn't necessarily make sense, but on its own doesn't seem malicious. And then an endpoint is getting a hit that looks suspicious, but doesn't have enough contextual information to understand. And then let's say your identity and access management system sees several logins um, that that on their face don't necessarily make sense, but without any contextual information, you can't make a decision one way or the other. Well, you tie those three things together, and then you have a picture of what's going on.
Mhm.
Now, if you integrate your security, step one is you've integrated them, and so your SIM or your log management system is seeing that. So it says, okay, I have three different events. Artificial intelligence and machine learning takes those three different events over millions of and billions of interactions and says, when we see these kinds of things happen in a disparate way, but they're happening in proximity to each other, this is an attack. This is the earmarks of some sort of attack. That's the kind of things that we think about when we think about AI and machine learning, is taking all these disparate pieces of information, putting them together in a contextualized way, and then making some very high level decisions around that. So when it comes to, say, our higher ed customers, when you think about security from a platform perspective, you've tied these things together and you have AI and machine learning um, contextualizing that, then the alerts that you get at the end of the day are incredibly meaningful. Now you add on automation to that, and
Mhm.
then your analysts are getting that event once, and they say, "Oh, this is definitely an attack. I've confirmed that. These are the steps I will take to mitigate for that, and I'm going to write that into a playbook, feed that back into the machine, and now if a similar sort of attack happens, all I get on that is, hey, this was happening, we stopped it. Here's your information on it if you need to follow up." So what we see is AI and machine learning not writing papers for you in that way, right? It's taking all of this context and then making decisions that we're confirming, and we're making decisions on, and then we're automating that so that we'll never have to see the same event twice. And I'm sure, as your security teams and every other security team uh, around has seen ransomware attacks that all look the same. Maybe they weren't effective, but they required your analyst to go do something. Now, if you can take that analyst away from these sort of events that are easily prevented, and then force them into a model where they're spending more time doing threat hunting, they're doing more time just understanding what's going on out there, the threats that are emerging, then AI and ML has made their day more effective. So when we think about it, it's truly learning how these systems interact and then producing repeatable automated plays so that
Mhm.
analysts can focus on emerging threats, can focus on higher level things. So that's really what we think about when it comes to that, because uh, the great thing about working for the largest cybersecurity company in the world is that we take in data from all of our customers, and that is it is of course de-identified and and normalized. But by looking at those billions of transactions, we are improving security outcomes on an iterative basis every second. You know, our systems are constantly updating, constantly reading this in, and that's how we're using machine learning, particularly to solve these problems. And I think it's the only way forward. Again, like zero trust, because
Mhm.
we can't just keep adding analysts to our security teams. We can't just continue building giant security operations. And the networks aren't getting any less complex. They're only
Mhm.
getting more complicated. So how do we manage that over time? That's really the promise of AI in this context.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's the best way to scale security operations, leveraging artificial
Absolutely.
intelligence and automation. Because we can't keep adding bodies. Of course, we have the budget constraint. Plus, you can only do that so much, right? So too many cooks aren't good for a kitchen.
Absolutely.
But AI and automation is the way to go. Wonderful. Are you seeing increased attacks since AIs are taking the main stage? I'm wondering if attackers are leveraging AIs for themselves to do more of to scale their attacks too.
Yeah, so we're not seeing as much of that yet. I think it's coming and it's going to be a bigger problem. What we're seeing is a lot more automated attacks, and we've been seeing that the last few years. And I think AI is going to only continue that trend. But the things like the things that are available today, um, even Chat GPT and Google's Bard and others are writing code snippets. So if you're an attacker and you're trying to figure out how to you've got the first couple steps figured out in how you're attacking an organization, but you need some code that's in a weird language that you don't have familiarity with, or you need to understand how to break into that system. Those tools can still help you with that. So I think that there's going to be more of that, and there's going to be more automated. Um, uh, so in the past, when attackers came in, they would break into a system through a few different methodologies, or try a few different methodologies. Then once they were in, they would do a bunch of reconnaissance. What kind of system is this? What code level are they up to? All of that stuff. All that stuff's being automated now. Now we are, and if we had one of our research guys on here, they may be able to tell us examples that they've seen, but it's not a far stretch to say, okay, if I can break into a machine, I can do recon automatically, feed that back into the machine, and then break out from there into different attack vectors tailored to that environment, and just go ahead and just do all of that in one step. I think that's I think that's probably already happening. I haven't seen it in our customers yet, but I guarantee it's happening out there because we've already seen a huge increase in the last few years of automated attacks. So this is just the next logical step, right? If you if,
Mhm.
if you can take the human out of the recon business and just have the scripts run those reconnaissance and then tailor the attacks and then go ahead and run those attacks,
Mhm.
that happens in a matter of seconds
Yep.
instead of days and weeks like it used to happen. So
Right.
it's absolutely going to happen if it hasn't already. And those same tools, the minute they're available to you and I, the attackers are already trying to figure out how to utilize them. I mean, ChatGPT had to make a change almost immediately once they started going out into beta, because ChatGPT 3, if you asked it a question in the right way, it would feed you code snippets that were potentially destructive.
Mm.
Um, because you could say, well, assume I'm a security researcher. I'm just wanting to understand how this works. I'm like, okay, well, I'll kick that out to you. Now they've actually had to, sort of de-weaponize it a little bit and say it just can't kick out some of these common um, uh, code snippets that could be destructive because it's just too easy to sort of trick it into doing that in the previous version. So we've
Yeah,
already seen that.
makes it too
Well,
accessible.
mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. So, based on your experience, if you were to say top one or two security considerations for any organization, not just higher ed, broadly, any organizations to tighten their security posture, what would that be?
I think step one is to try to um, understand all those areas where you don't have visibility. Because if you have a great IAM system that's, you know, well thought out and folks have appropriate access, you only see that moment that they log in. You've got that moment in time, but if you don't have a transactional view, at least some transactional view along the way, then you don't know what they're doing. You just know that they did or did not present a good password, or they did or did not pass the MFA check, but you don't know anything beyond that. So I guess the first step really is where are those areas I really need to focus my security on, and then what are those what visibility do I need into those areas or those assets so that I can feel comfortable knowing that I have an understanding what those transactions look at, and then spend some time defining that protect surface. And then the zero trust methodology really begins there. But you got to understand if you can't see it, you can't protect it. So whether you need to do an attack surface management review, whether you need to do an asset inventory review so that you can understand those the assets that are on your networks, or if you need to put either XDR type devices or firewall type devices in the network so that you can get that visibility, then you can start building out that zero trust. But it all starts with visibility. Our entire uh, philosophy is around if you can't see it, you can't protect it. And I've really taken that to heart because um, all the incidents that I've had to deal with in the past, we always got hung up on some situation where you knew this part of the story and this part of the story, but you couldn't get that middle part. You just didn't have visibility into it, so you couldn't say definitively this was what was happening. So you get that visibility into those systems, and then you can start to build those policies that tighten things down. And ultimately, and I know this, I tailor this for higher ed a little bit, but in higher ed, you security cannot get in the way of the mission.
Mhm.
In the financial world, in the healthcare world, sometimes it gets in the way of the mission because the risk is too high. But when you
Mhm.
think about what researchers are doing day in and day out, you have to help them be secure, but you can't get in the way of their research. That's
Absolutely.
that's what runs the university. That's
Mhm.
their whole purpose to be there. So how
Yep.
do you find that visibility? How do you build effective security, and how do you do it in a way that's not incredibly disruptive to your customers? That's the goal, but it starts with visibility.
Okay, well said. Thank you, Hunter. Great. That's a lot of useful information, Hunter. I'd like to ask just two concluding questions, just to know a little bit more about you for the benefit of my audience. Is there a business book that you would recommend for my audience? Is there a business book that you enjoyed reading in the past that you would recommend for my audience?
Well, there's always the classic How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think that's a great book and timeless in that when I was in the CISO role, I couldn't I couldn't demand anyone do anything. I could build policies that allowed, that made us more secure, but I had to go out and actually understand what the use cases were, go to departments, hear what they're trying to do, and help them understand that I'm trying to build a more secure infrastructure for them, but I'm not trying to get in their way. So, How to Win Friends and Influence People is a great book for that. And the other one is one I just mentioned. It was George Finney's book, Project Zero Trust. George Finney also wrote another book called Well Aware, which I really like, and it's about making your constituencies security aware without overburdening them. You know, and Well Aware is a great book about how you do that, because security awareness is still a cornerstone of how we, how we do security, and every CISO out there has to spend some time on security awareness. So those would be the three. I mean, I know I'm talking up George Finney quite a bit, but what he's been writing lately is really responsive to the role that he's in. He's a CISO, and he has to live this world. So Well Aware, Project Zero Trust, and then the classic How to Win Friends and Influence People. I would say that those are great books to help get your bearings around how to do security in the modern context.
Okay, sounds like good choices. I've definitely read the timeless How to Win Friends and Influence People, but I need to go find the two books that you mentioned from George Finney. Sounds very interesting as well. Excellent. So where do my audience find you if they want to stay connected with you? Is LinkedIn the best place, or is there a company website that you want to point them to?
Well, certainly my LinkedIn is where I spend a lot of time doing these things. I used to have a Twitter, but we've all started to abandon Twitter as you probably expect. So LinkedIn is certainly the place where you can find me in any context. From a Palo Alto perspective, if you look up Palo Alto Networks higher education, we talk a lot about how we do security in the higher ed context. I certainly love working with this community. I'll say that one of the great things about my job is that the higher ed community, unlike many others, talks about not only their successes but their failures. And how, I mean, I was at EDUCAUSE a few weeks ago, and a customer was talking about us. We weren't part of the presentation. They were just talking about us, and they were talking about how we helped them. But there were some problems along the way, and how we helped them get through them, and how we Palo Alto learned from some of those things as well. So on the higher ed side, I'm always happy to engage in this community. But if you're just looking for me and you want to talk about any of these things, LinkedIn is the place to be. And you've got my LinkedIn info, so I would assume we would put that.
Yep, I'm happy to put that in the show notes as well for reference. This is great. Thank you, Hunter. Thanks again for this enriching conversation. I learned quite a bit today, and we look forward to learning more from the materials that you mentioned. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.